it's my presentation will focus actually on the US and Russian intervention. Why actually I link it both? Because my argument that, which maybe I explained toward my presentation, that the Russian position in Syria is not related exactly into the Assad government or into the Assad regime, rather than actually opposing the US policy. And this is why I think these two things are very much related, the US foreign policy and the Russian intervention. When the Russians actually feel that there is the US administration, they can do more in Syria, and this is why that the Russians became more aggressive, or not aggressive, and actually Professor Mai may be in a much better position to speak on the issue. But into my visit into Moscow 3 times, I met twice with the Lavrov as a part of the opposition delegation. In the meetings, we never talk about issues in Syria, more about actually that the opposition is being backed by the West, by the Americans, and this is why always we struck into the questions that the Syrians being lost between the United States and Russia. My account today, it's a mix of personal stories, since I'm Syrian and being as a human rights activist, my background since 2000, and then also some academic background which influenced my work. In 2007, I became very involved in the issue of transitional justice, especially when countries who actually they have massive human rights violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and how to deal with the past to move into transition into more democratic institutions and legitimate institutions. And that visit took me, of course, into Bosnia, where actually this is a cemetery that the United States under Clinton administration helped to memorize the victims of Srebrenica massacre in 1995. And then also in Chile and in other countries in Latin America. But I never thought that's what happened in other countries, and studied, and at that time we did very detailed research on the massive graves in Iraq under Saddam Hussein. That's what happened in my own country, even in my hometown. I'm born and raised in the city called Daraya, with the south of Damascus. And you'll see this is actually pictures of the massacre happened in Daraya, and the one on the blue t-shirt, this is my cousin, who's been killed actually in the massacre in Daraya in August. He has 3 nice kids who's now live in Egypt. And even he can't bury it because the government actually destroyed the cemetery in the city and did not allow for anyone to be buried in dignity. And then the response of the international community, the massacre in 2012, it was actually, it's normal for that the Secretary General asked for investigation of the massacre happened in Daraya. The argument we have before, especially the genocide happened in Rwanda and in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 94 and in 95, that the lack of let's say media, lack of data, we have very few pictures of the genocide in Rwanda in 90. But what's going on in Syria actually in the middle of the social media? And this is, we have at least, we documented 1.5 million videos and YouTubes about the war crimes and crimes against humanity, and stored and is being investigated by many lawyers and judges. And this is a picture from after the massacre in the city of Daraya. That's the murderers who did that, actually they proud of they did, and they posted on the Facebook. And this is the contradictory we live right now. That's the international community is aware of what's happening, but the response of the international community, especially of the term has been used all the time, never again, it became often again. Because, and this is actually some big photos of on Daraya. This is actually my building is being destroyed. The city of Daraya, it's 250,000, 250,000 used to live there before 2011, and now they only 4,000 live in the city. It's my mother in Turkey, my brother in Jordan, my sister in Lebanon, and this is the case of every Syrian family have been affected. And you see the destruction in the city, which is huge. This is a statement came from the UN just yesterday about the city of Daraya. After 5 years, the UN has been blocked by the Assad government and did not allow even actually to deliver one single bottle of milk. And this is a statement by Stephen O'Brien yesterday at the UN, that's because the UN in the Security Council resolution after the negotiations 2268, they listed 18 areas. They called the government, they call it hard to reach. We call it the besieged area. At least according to the Security Council resolution 2268, 14 of them under the Assad government control. And 6 of them, among them Daraya, the government did not allow the UN or any international organization to go into the area and to deliver aid or humanitarian assistance. Well, this has actually struck me, and how the people, they lost faith even if the international community with the UN. We're talking about the photos like the World War II. And even that, after 5 years, the UN was unable actually to deliver any of the aid to the city. And this is why I call it the collapse of the international justice system that the international community tried to build after the massacre happened in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Rwanda, and of course after the Holocaust, which tried first to build the ICC, International Criminal Court, as a beacon of the justice in the world, and then of course what's in 2005 responsibility to protect, which was never been applied into Syria because of division among the Security Council. The Swiss government actually proposed a very good initiative and supported by 86 countries that the Security Council should not use a veto in issues related to the genocide, war crimes, anti-crimes against humanity, because the Russians and the Chinese used double vetoes, especially in Syria, on these issues. But of course, this initiative, the Swiss initiative, never go through. And I will not actually speak too much about the US policy and the theories about the foreign policy and all of that, because actually you have here in the room experts, they know better than anyone on the issue.
I would not assume that.
No, on the issue, but what struck me, if you go to the website of the State Department, they put actually 3 issues as a priority or as a mission statement of the State Department, which security, democracy, and prosperity. And every president actually pick one they would like to put it as a mission statement for its administration. And maybe the Obama administration put the issue of security as a priority, but how they define the issue of national security, this became the question. In his last interview, defined the climate change as a national security issue. This is why he showed a leadership on the issue of the climate change. But he never think actually about the issues of the massacres or the war crimes and crimes against humanity or losing thousands. Now, according to the UN last week, number of the people killed in Syria amount to 400,000. 400,000, which larger number of any civil war comparing happened in history in Latin America or in Africa. And in also number of the refugees, it's actually amount to 11 million. We have 5 million and 6 million as displayed inside Syria. Of course, the founding fathers of the United States, and that's reflected in the US constitutions, that gave more power to the president in the issue. especially in the foreign policy. And then of course, if we compare what's happened, the theory of Sistanovich on maximalist and minimalist, it's maybe applied into the Middle East today. Because look what's happened in Johnson after his intervention in Vietnam. We have actually, after that, we have Nixon, which opened up into China. And then after George Bush in Iraq, we have Barack Obama, which opened up into Russia. And if we actually go back into comparison into the history, at that time, the genocide happened in Cambodia in 1974, and all of that, which interesting that the second quote and the second paragraph from Samantha Power book, very famous book, and she said, describe actually the weakness of the US foreign policy in response on the genocide, that the term has been used every time at that time, what they call the South Asia fatigue. And now if we look, actually analyze the speeches of Obama or most of his aides, they use the Middle East mess. And that term has been used, which struck me every time. The same time that the term that the South Asia fatigue has been used in the 70s. And I think the most frank and the most detailed interview that the Obama gave for the Atlantic. And he used the Middle East mess at least 4 or 7 times in describing of what happened in Libya, in Yemen, and in Syria. And that's reflected, of course, in the policy. And this is why the Obama administration, every president would like to be in the picture here. And this is everyone think about what his legacy can. And this is why when the advisor, John Podesta, put the priority of Obama legacy in the issues environment, immigration, and healthcare. And none of the issues, of course, in the foreign policy, and exactly that's reflect on his policy into Syria. He showed leadership on the issue of healthcare reform and immigration, in the issue of Iran and Cuba, which showed that he is not a weak president, because but on the issue of Syria, we can see that there is 3 stages, 3 phases, which I think it's important to study, because not reflect the Obama legacy on foreign policy in the Middle East, but also reflect on the Obama policy not only in Syria but in the whole Middle East. From August 2011 until actually February 2012, the U.S. foreign policy toward Syria, it focused on the issue, has been repeated. And the issue at that time, the U.S. is leading a very strong position that the Assad lost his legitimacy. But there is no actions has been taken. There is a different argument has been proposed that we don't need to show the war that what's happened in Syria as an American revolution. It has to be true indigenous Syrian revolution, and this is why we have to stay aside, and we just supported politically on the UN Human Rights level Council in Geneva, the UN Security Council, but there is no action has to be taken. And this is why every time any U.S. officials, they repeat from 2011, 2012, that the Assad lost his legitimacy. The Assad, then later on, exactly in February 2012, the Assad start using the air power in very limited number. The Assad put in his mind, of course, what happened in Libya, especially after the intervention in Libya. This is why he cannot use the air power more and more. And this is why he started using the air power, and with the same time the chlorine gas or some kind of chemical gas against, especially in specific areas. Then the Obama administration come up with a new policy after February 2012 until August 2013, which called the use of the chemical weapons as a red line. And if the Assad government use the chemical weapons, we have to act and we have to do something about that. This policy has been repeated over and over for almost a year. What's happened in August 2013, the Assad government used the chemical attacks in eastern Ghouta. And a part of my town, Daraya, and at least 7 in Daraya has been killed by the chemical attacks, but large number was in eastern Ghouta at that time, which 1,400, among them at least 400 children. Sorry for the pictures. Then, of course, the Obama administration come up with the deal that the Assad government will give up the chemical weapons and will not pursue any actions. After, of course, the mysterious deal with the Russians about that, and the Security Council support resolution of that. The issue of the moving red line has been, of course, the most debated issue in the foreign policy here in the United States. That makes the United States less credible among its allies in the Middle East, less credible among the world, because the U.S. president is a chief, it's commander of chief, and has to put his feet in his words. And of course, but the most important thing that even there is no actions, there is no policies has been developed to change what's happened even after the chemical attacks. Because the eastern Ghouta, after 5 years, is still under siege. There is no medical aid or nothing happened reach into the area. I mean, we allow the people to be died there, to be killed there, and there is no consequences, not only punish the Assad government or at least lift the siege who's been there. And this is why the policy from 2013 until September 2014, which focused on the term non-lethal and humanitarian assistance. Everything happened as we will increase the humanitarian assistance, but we will not do any actions to stop that. I think this is 2013 and 2014, by far and by numbers, it was the most deadly year in Syria regarding the number of casualties, because the Assad government unleashed the use of the air power. The air power, especially the barrel bombs, and I will speak in details about the barrel bombs because it did not get much attention in the Western media about this discriminate use of the barrel bombs. This is photo as example in the city of Aleppo. Aleppo is the largest city on earth. It's 10,000 years, and now it's all in ruin.
You mean the oldest city?
Oldest city. And then, of course, this is because of the use of the barrel bombs or the Scud missiles, long-range missiles, and all of that. Actually, the barrel bombs, it's a massive box. It's filled of TNT and small pieces of iron. They put it together, and actually they just drop it from the helicopter. It's
just shove it out the door.
Exactly. The U.S. there is smart bombs and dumb bombs. They call it dumb bombs, but this is even more dumbest, because it's not actually something. It's just for hurt the civilians because there is no targets and indiscriminate. And the government used the barrel bombs in the city of Daraya, at least 40,000 barrel bombs from 2013 until 2015. And we'll see actually in the pictures how it's indiscriminate. And then always I say every barrel bombs, it's a war crimes, because never actually take any of the consideration of the international humanitarian law of indiscriminate, disproportion, and all of that. And that's the unleash of the Assad government of the use of the barrel bombs in 2013 and 14 never has any response from the international community, and that's encouraged, of course, later on. In September in 2015, still the opposition, the armed opposition, we can talk more maybe in the question how it's fragmented and how it's developed and all of that. But the Russians, in surprise move, decided actually to act and to help the Assad government in September 2015. The motives behind that is not clear yet, because just a month before the intervention, they actually met of the delegation of the Syrian opposition. But there is actually some maybe miscalculation that the Russians, they expected they can achieve something very quickly, and they added that into the internal circus that the Putin tried to do. Because everything, I think, in the Putin mindset, it's about more local, have got more popularity, especially after the economic problems and all of that. The Russian intervention add that into more. The Russians, they said they target the ISIS, Islamic State, and the other terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda in Syria. But 90% or even more of their targets was the armed opposition and the civilians. In February 2016, at least 5 coordinated hospitals has been targeted by the Russians. And this is photos actually from the hospitals and from the areas there. This is actually a satellite image of Aleppo. We'll see that 2/3 of the city has been ruined. The city of Aleppo, it's 5 million. Now only 500,000 live in the city. Most of the population, they left the city as refugees in Turkey. Then in September 2014, it was the rise of ISIS. The US shifted its policy from non-lethal assistance, humanitarian assistance, to focus only on the ISIS. And that's add more contradictory on the US foreign policy. Because now, until today, the US foreign policy deal with the Syria as 3 different crises. We have the Syria transition, or the political transition, and the issue with the flow of the refugees, and the rise of ISIS. The US actually want to take care of the last issue with the ISIS and neglect or forget the issue of the flow of the refugees, which is being owned by Europe, and nobody care exactly about the Syria transition. Because remember, the Geneva communique has been proposed by the Kofi Annan in September 2012, never been endorsed by the Security Council until September 2014, after the rise of ISIS. It's 2 years that the Security Council never actually endorsed the Geneva communique, which is supposed to be the base of the negotiations at that time. And then, of course, the images coming from the starvation in the city of Madaya and in other cities, the flow of the refugees added more different. But the problem in the foreign, and this is of course a photo of a Ziadeh camp, now became the largest refugee camp in the world, which 400 people live there.
400,000?
Yes, 400,000 live there.
Is that in Jordan?
In Jordan. It's in desert. I've been there twice. There is no minimum actually level of security. There is no minimum level of, you can imagine everything happened there. There is no security. There is actually, because a huge one, the UN always lack of any ability to do anything without actually support. And this is actually, I like this one because it's interesting article by the Washington Post. It's how the Obama tried actually to stay out from Syria, not to solve Syria, but how to disconnect himself with anything can do in Syria because of the complexity, or always he say that it's very complicated and we can do more. The U.S. after the Russian intervention in September 2015, the U.S. Administration reached at a conclusion that we can't achieve anything in Syria without actually having Russia on the table. But how we'll do that? By convincing Russians to change their course. If the Russia did not change their course, we have to continue to do that. And that's exactly the foreign policy that not only the US but also the West trying to convincing the Russians to change their course on Syria, which completely, even in the last press conference that Obama gave just 3 days ago, he's never mentioned, of course, the tragedy of the Syrian, the humanitarian catastrophe or something like that. He said that this is actually the Russians, they have to change their policy toward Bashar Al-Asad. I think this is a wrong policy to follow, because you're putting all your eggs on something you don't own, you don't belong to you. And it's unpredictable. Nobody expect that the Russians, they would change their course just because the issue of reason or being convinced by calculation. Now, this is a map of Syria, show that the 5 different actors control in states in Syria. We have of course the Assad Syrian army, which control less than 16%. We have Daesh with ISIS controlled by 50 to 55% of Syria.
5-0.
Yes, but this is actually mostly desert. It's not popular. The most populated area is still under the control of the Assad government. And the armed opposition or the rebels, they control 6 to 7%. And the most stable one, we have the BAD, which is the Syrian version of the Turkish PKK. The Kurds PKK, they control from 5 to 7% in the north. Then also we have within the areas of the Al-Nusra Front, which are part of Al-Qaeda. That's make it much more complicated to reach a deal if you don't have exactly the end game in your mind, a vision of the end game, how to deal of these 5 different actors in Syria. Well, this is something actually the Russians, this is some of the photos of the Russians in the hospitals. I think it's my recommendations to the end that there's the Bush administration has been criticized many times because actually the miscalculation in Iraq, and maybe because they don't have exit strategy of the war in Iraq, which of course I agree with it. But sometimes actually the inactions have the same consequences of the misleading actions. And this is the story of Syria. It's true now Iraq is a mess for the calculation actions, but the inactions in Syria, we have the same consequences, even much worse in Iraq. The destruction in Syria, the lack of the central government, and of course the implications of the prolonged civil war in Syria on Jordan and Israel, even on Iraq, and in Lebanon, of course, has more implications than the intervention. And this is why if the U.S. actually took the decisions of the impose a no-fly zone in 2012 or 2013, not only we save thousands of lives, but much more important, we stopped the flow of the refugees. Nobody heard actually about the refugees in 2012, 2013, because they stayed in Turkey. But when they actually cross the border into Europe, it became an issue and became a question. But 3 or 4 million refugees almost in Turkey, registered and unregistered, nobody cared about them, but when they crossed about the border into Europe, became an issue and questions. If we have the issue of no-fly zone, at least to stop the use of barrel bombs, that maybe can change. This is why I think if we see now, this is the New York Times. It's an old one. The candidates, their position, the no-fly zone, that most of them they support. Which interesting, they don't put actually Trump, because maybe he hasn't any position in any of the issues. He keep flipping. This is why it's only actually 3 they don't support the no-fly zone, but the majority they support the no-fly zone. Even Clinton, she said they support the no-fly zone, even with the Russian intervention. This is actually what I will end here by the implication of the Russian intervention on crisis in Syria. First of all, they complicate the crisis. The most important thing that they feel they empower the Assad government to continue its war. The Assad government never has in mind an end game of how things. They believe that they can reach a victory, and this is actually some of the flyers that the Russians has been dropped into the population. If you just the first one in Arabic said "40 نوع من الخير." We have 40 different types of bombs, and we have the ability to destroy you everywhere. And this is actually the type of the cards the Russians has been dropped on the Syrian on the north. And that actually reflects the feeling of the Assad government, that the Russian intervention empowered the Assad government, that we can reach a victory, we can actually do another Chechnya in Syria by eliminating the whole rebels and the Syrian armed opposition. The second implication, that the political solution that everyone talked about it, we became far from reaching, because the ABC of any armed conflict or conflict resolution, that you have to the stick, the issue, who can convince or enforce the Assad government to accept the principle of the negotiations. The negotiation in Geneva, just coming back from Geneva actually last week, you can describe in any way, but not negotiations. I mean, the UN envoy told us in one of the meetings that he spent 2 days with the Assad government delegation talking about the Assad government. They need actually to know exactly the procedures. And then they have to have a definition of the terrorism in Syria. That terrorism is in capital T or in small t. Just for 2 days about the definition of, is not only not serious, but the Assad government used the Geneva negotiations as a platform for their own agenda and to dismiss the opposition and to show that that the opposition is not serious in reaching any political solution. I end by saying that I think in the worst, nobody exactly the end game in Syria, even the Syrians themselves, who became now the lost in this catastrophe. The negotiations, of course, will not lead into nowhere. Nobody can actually fight the Russians in Syria except the Americans, and the Americans are not interested in doing anything. And this is maybe, as a Syrian, we have to live with the pain for 1 more year. until we see that if there is any change in the administration, in the policies. Thank you very much.